Amara's life in Accra was not the one she had imagined for herself. She was smart, ambitious, and once dreamed of building a successful career in the city. But when her father's health began to fail, she made a choice that changed everything. While her friends moved forward with jobs, marriages, and children, Amara stayed home. She put her dreams on hold so she could care for the man who had raised her. Her days became filled with quiet sacrifices, turning down job offers that would have taken her away, ending a relationship because she could not divide her time, and letting go of the little freedoms that once made her happy. The world outside her home felt like it was moving quickly, but for Amara, time slowed down to the rhythm of her father's illness. Far away, her sister Ngozi lived a very different life. She had moved abroad years earlier and built a world of comfort and luxury. Social media showed her traveling to new countries, dressing in expensive clothes, and attending parties. She rarely came back to Ghana, and when she did, her visits were short. Yet she never failed to tell everyone, with a laugh and a glass in her hand, that she was their father's favorite. Amara never said much in response. She simply carried on, cooking meals, giving medicine, and watching over her father day and night. It wasn't glamorous and it wasn't easy, but it was love, the kind that doesn't need applause. Every morning, before the sun had even touched the streets of Accra, Amara was already awake. Her days began with the sound of her father coughing softly in his room, a reminder that her duty never slept. She would light the stove, prepare porridge, and make sure his medicine was ready before he even asked. Some mornings she would gently help him out of bed, bathing him and dressing him with the patience of someone who had done it 1,000 times. It was work that demanded both her hands and her heart. Her life moved in a cycle of routines, cooking his favorite soups, changing his bedsheets, sitting by his side when he grew restless, and staying up late when his body ached too much to let him sleep. She learned to read his face like a book. When his eyes softened, she knew he was at ease. When his brows furrowed, she knew the pain was creeping back. In those quiet hours, she hummed songs from their childhood, holding his hand until the discomfort passed. Outside their home, neighbors watched. They whispered to each other as she carried groceries back from the market or walked slowly with her father in the courtyard. "Amara is the true daughter," they would say, lowering their voices but never enough to keep her from hearing. She smiled politely, but those words sat heavily in her chest. They were meant as praise, but they also reminded her of the sister who was barely present. Ngozi's visits were rare, timed with holidays when the neighborhood was alive with music and gatherings. She would step out of a taxi in bright designer clothes, her perfume trailing behind her, carrying expensive handbags that turned heads. People rushed to greet her, impressed by her glamour and the stories she told of life abroad. In those moments, Amara felt like a shadow in her own home, unnoticed though she was the one who never left. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Amara wondered if her father truly saw her sacrifices. Did he notice how she had given up her own life for him? Or in his heart, did he still wish that Ngozi was around more often, the daughter who made him proud with her wealth and status? These questions lingered like smoke, filling her thoughts when she sat by his bedside, spooning soup into his mouth or pressing a damp cloth against his forehead. She never asked him. Instead, she kept moving one task after another, pouring herself into the role that no one else wanted to take. Her body grew tired, her youth slipping away in slow pieces, but her spirit stayed firm. Every day she chose her father over herself, even when she wasn't sure if anyone, least of all him, truly understood what that cost her. When Ngozi finally came back to Accra, it wasn't because their father had taken a turn for the worse. She returned the way she always did, sweeping in with a loud laugh, a suitcase full of clothes, and a phone glued to her hand. From the moment she stepped inside the house, she had comments waiting for Amara. "Ah, sister, look at you," she said with a smirk. "You're already looking old. All this staying home, cooking and bathing daddy every day. You're wasting your youth." Her words were dressed as jokes, but they carried a sting that Amara felt deep in her chest. Amara swallowed her hurt, as she always did, and kept moving through her daily tasks. She served food, adjusted their father's pillows, and tried to stay out of the way. But everywhere Ngozi went, she brought attention to herself. She posed for selfies with their father, posted them online with captions like #FamilyFirst, and soaked up the comments from her friends who praised her for being such a dutiful daughter. Amara watched in silence, holding back the urge to correct the picture Ngozi painted for the world. The tension grew sharper during the family dinner. Their aunts and uncles gathered, cousins filled the table, and the air buzzed with laughter. Ngozi sat in the middle like a star, talking about her life abroad, her trips to Paris, the new car she had bought, the apartment she was renting in a high-rise. Every word drew admiration. Relatives nodded, clapped their hands, and praised her for being successful and making the family proud. Meanwhile, Amara moved quietly between the kitchen and the table, refilling plates, clearing dishes, making sure everyone was comfortable. Few people noticed the sweat on her forehead or the tiredness in her eyes. When someone did turn to her, it was usually to ask for more stew or another bottle of soda. Her presence was expected, almost invisible like the furniture in the room. Their father sat at the head of the table, smiling faintly but saying little. Amara kept glancing at him, wondering if he would speak up, if he would tell the family who had been by his side all these years. But he remained silent, caught between the two daughters who loved him in such different ways. As the evening went on, Amara felt herself shrinking. She thought about the nights she had stayed awake to soothe her father's pain, the meals she had cooked, the opportunities she had turned down. None of it seemed to matter here. The relatives clung to Ngozi's stories, dazzled by her wealth and glamour, as if that was the true measure of love. By the time the dinner ended, Amara felt like she had been erased from her own family's story. She cleared the table quietly, listening to Ngozi's laughter echo through the house, and wondered how it was possible to give so much and still feel unseen. The months that followed felt heavier than anything Amara had known. Her father's health began to decline quickly. What had once been simple tasks, helping him sit up, feeding him soup, walking him to the courtyard, turned into struggles that left them both exhausted. His once strong voice grew weaker, his hands shook more often, and his memory began to slip away in fragments. Amara adjusted her life even more, staying by his side from morning until night, afraid to leave him for even an hour. The doctors prescribed new treatments, ones that cost more than she had. Amara looked at her small savings, money she had once imagined using to start a business or rent a small apartment of her own. Without hesitation, she used it all for her father's medicine and hospital visits. Each time she handed over cash at the pharmacy or the clinic, her chest tightened, knowing there was nothing left for herself. But she told no one, not even her sister, who would have dismissed it as unnecessary sacrifice. Days blurred into nights, and Amara's body carried the weight of endless caregiving. Her back ached from lifting him, her eyes burned from sleepless nights, yet she pressed on. She often sat by his bed, fanning him through fevers, whispering prayers under her breath that he would hold on just a little longer. One evening, as the sun dipped and shadows filled the room, her father reached for her hand. His fingers, frail and trembling, wrapped around hers with surprising strength. Amara froze, watching his lips move. He whispered something, words soft and broken, almost lost in the air between them. She leaned closer, straining to catch them, but all she heard was a faint murmur. It could have been thank you, or perhaps a name, or maybe nothing clear at all. Her heart pounded as she held his hand tighter, hoping he meant gratitude, hoping he truly saw her devotion. Yet doubt pressed in. Did he really understand the years she had given up for him? Or did he still carry in his heart the bright image of Ngozi, the daughter who appeared with gifts and laughter while Amara was the one who carried the weight? Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back, forcing herself to smile at him. She didn't want him to see her pain. In that moment, it didn't matter whether he had spoken words of thanks or not. What mattered was the warmth of his hand in hers, fragile and fleeting, as if reminding her that love was sometimes silent, sometimes hidden, but still there in the touch between them. That night, Amara sat by his bedside long after he had fallen asleep, her hand still resting in his. She stared at him, torn between love and uncertainty, not knowing if her sacrifices had truly reached his heart, or if they would vanish unspoken, like the whisper she could not fully hear. The house grew quiet after her father passed away. For days, Amara moved through the rooms like a shadow, folding his clothes, packing away his medicines, and sitting in the chair where he used to rest. Grief wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, but beneath the sadness, there was also a small sense of peace. She told herself that at least she had been there until the very end, that he had not left this world alone. In her heart, She believed her years of sacrifice would not go unnoticed. When the family gathered at the lawyer's office, Amara felt nervous but steady. She dressed simply in a clean dress and sandals, clutching a small purse that held the last of her money. She was certain that the will would bring her some security. Perhaps the family home, maybe even a small piece of land. Something to show that her father had seen her loyalty, her devotion. Something to help her start again. Ngozi swept into the office like she always did, wearing a bright outfit and heels that clicked against the tiles. She greeted everyone loudly, her perfume filling the room, her laughter breaking the silence. Amara sat quietly beside her, waiting for the lawyer to begin. The lawyer cleared his throat, opened the folder and began to read. The room was still at first, filled only with his voice as he listed their father's possessions: house, land, savings, accounts. Amara's hands rested calmly on her lap, her mind already picturing herself living in the home she had cared for, continuing her father's legacy. Then came the words that cut through her chest like glass. All properties, lands, and financial accounts are hereby left in full to my daughter Ngozi. The air shifted instantly. A gasp escaped someone at the table. A cousin muttered under his breath. Amara's heart stopped. She blinked, sure she had misheard, waiting for the lawyer to correct himself to read her name. But it never came. Every single thing, every corner of the house she had scrubbed, every tree she had watered in the compound, every savings account she thought might keep her safe, was handed to her sister. Amara sat frozen, her face pale, her lips pressed tightly together. Across the table, Ngozi smirked, leaning back in her chair with the satisfaction of someone who had already expected this. Relatives exchanged glances, some whispering, others shaking their heads. Nobody looked directly at Amara, as if they were too afraid to meet the pain in her eyes. Her chest tightened as the reality sank in. The years she had given up, the life she had placed on hold, all the love and labor she had poured into her father, none of it mattered in that document. In the end, she was left with nothing but her grief and the sound of paper rustling in the lawyer's hands. Amara lowered her gaze, fighting back tears, feeling her whole world collapse in silence while the room buzzed around her. She had never felt so invisible. In the days after the will reading, Amara could barely breathe. The shock clung to her like a second skin. She replayed the lawyer's words over and over in her head, trying to understand how her father, her own father, could leave her with nothing. But then whispers began to reach her. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, and one afternoon she overheard a relative say something that made her heart stop. Ngozi had been visiting the lawyer long before their father died. The truth unfolded like a cruel film in her mind. She pictured Ngozi arriving at the lawyer's office in her fancy dresses, walking in with confidence, carrying that smile she used whenever she wanted something. She would sit across from the lawyer, speaking softly, weaving stories about how she alone could manage the family estate, how Amara was too simple, too tied down, too unprepared for such responsibility. With her practiced charm, she painted herself as the only capable daughter. The lawyer, a man who had known their family for years, hesitated at first. He had seen Amara's sacrifices, the way she had kept the household running. But Ngozi was persuasive. She laughed easily, touched his arm as she spoke, and reminded him of the father's pride in her success abroad. When she brought their father in, frail and tired, she leaned close to him, whispering words only he could hear. She told him that she would protect the family name, that leaving everything to her was the smart choice. Amara imagined the scene painfully clear. Her father sitting in that office chair, weary from illness, his mind clouded. He trusted too easily, especially when it came to Ngozi's polished words. She had always been his bright star, the daughter he liked to show off. And so, with a trembling hand, he signed the papers, never realizing that he was erasing the daughter who had given him her entire life. When Amara finally understood this, the betrayal cut deeper than any knife. It wasn't just Ngozi's trickery that hurt, it was her father's blindness. He had been swayed by glamour and lies, unable to see the truth right in front of him. All the nights she had stayed awake by his side, all the money she had poured into his treatment, all the years she had lost, it seemed invisible to him when it mattered most. She sat in her room that night, staring at the walls she had once scrubbed clean, and felt a heaviness in her chest. She wasn't only grieving her father's death anymore. She was grieving the trust she thought they shared. the bond she believed was unbreakable. To realize he had chosen Ngozi even in weakness felt like losing him all over again. The betrayal wasn't just her sister's. It was her father's too. And that truth was the hardest to carry. For a while Amara thought she would break under the weight of it all. Losing her father was already painful, but losing everything he owned to Ngozi's trickery left her feeling empty. She had no money, no house, and no clear path forward. There were nights she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if her whole life had been wasted. But deep inside, something refused to let her collapse. She had already survived heartbreak, loneliness, and disappointment. She decided she would survive this too. Amara thought back to the years of caring for her father, the endless meals she had prepared to keep him nourished. She remembered how the neighbors often praised her cooking, how her soups and stews reminded them of home. That memory sparked something inside her. She didn't have land or money, but she had her hands, her skills, and her recipes. Slowly, the idea began to take shape. She would start cooking for others, even if it was just from a small stall by the roadside. First, it was humble. She borrowed a neighbor's large pot, bought a few ingredients with the little she had left, and set up under a tree with a simple table. She cooked jollof rice, light soup, and fried plantain, dishes that carried the warmth of her home. People walking by stopped, drawn in by the aroma, and soon word spread that Amara's food tasted like comfort. Friends and neighbors who had once whispered about her sacrifices now came forward to support her. One lent her chairs, another gave her an umbrella for shade. A cousin helped design a small sign with her name. Bit by bit, Amara's little stall grew into a gathering place. Workers came during lunch breaks, children bought snacks on their way from school, and neighbors brought visitors to taste her food. The work was not easy. She woke up before dawn to go to the market, hauling vegetables and bags of rice with her own hands. She cooked in the heat, sweat dripping down her back, and served customers with a tired but steady smile. But unlike before, her effort no longer felt invisible. People paid her, thanked her, and returned the next day asking for more. For the first time in years, her sacrifices were seen. Each evening, as she counted her small earnings, she felt a spark of pride. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Slowly, she began saving again. With the encouragement of her community, she expanded. First by buying a second table, then by hiring a neighbor's daughter to help serve. Her stall turned into a small shop, and her shop began to grow into a business. Amara realized that while her father had left her nothing, life was offering her something greater, the chance to build her own future. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was creating. And with each pot of food she stirred, she felt stronger, as if she was finally stepping into the life she was meant to live. When Ngozi first inherited everything, she moved like a queen. She wasted no time in showing the world her new wealth. In Lagos, she bought 2 luxury cars that gleamed like mirrors under the sun. She hosted parties in the mansion their father had left behind, filling the rooms with loud music, expensive drinks, and crowds of people eager to be seen with her. On social media, she posted photos from trips to Dubai, Paris, and Cape Town, her captions dripping with pride. Living the good life. Daddy's girl forever. For a while, it looked like she had everything anyone could want. Friends swarmed around her, raising glasses in her honor, praising her beauty, her clothes, her lifestyle. But underneath the sparkle, the money was vanishing quickly. The cars needed maintenance, the trips were costly, and the parties grew more extravagant by the week. She spent with no thought of tomorrow, believing her inheritance would last forever. Within 2 years, cracks began to show. The bank accounts that once overflowed started to dry up. Creditors knocked at her door, demanding payments for loans she had taken to keep up her image. Friends who used to cheer for her stopped answering her calls. Slowly, the parties grew smaller until there were none at all. The mansion, once a symbol of her triumph, became a burden she could no longer afford. Bills piled up, property taxes went unpaid, and whispers spread that the house would be taken by the bank. One morning, officials arrived at the gates, papers in hand, and the truth could no longer be hidden. The mansion was foreclosed. Ngozi stood there in disbelief, watching strangers put locks on the doors of the very home she had paraded as her prize. Her neighbors, who once admired her shiny cars and glamorous lifestyle, now shook their heads, murmuring about waste and pride. The same people who had crowded her parties barely gave her a second glance. Her life in Lagos quickly unraveled. With no money, no property, and no true friends left, she found herself alone. The clothes, the bags, the flashy jewelry meant nothing now. She tried selling them off piece by piece, but it was never enough to cover the mountain of debt. Each day felt smaller, lonelier, and harder to bear. In quiet moments when the noise of the city faded, Ngozi thought back to her sister. She remembered the way Amara used to serve their father with gentle hands, how she had never cared about attention or applause. Back then, Ngozi had mocked her, calling her life wasted. Now, with everything gone, she began to see the truth she had ignored. Amara had built strength, while she had built illusions. By the time she realized it, the fall was complete. The girl who once lived like a star was now wandering in the shadows, searching for a way to begin again. Amara's small food stall that once sat under a tree grew faster than she ever imagined. What started with one borrowed pot and a wooden table turned into a shop, and soon after, into something bigger. Customers kept coming back, telling their friends and neighbors about her food. The flavors reminded them of home, of comfort, of love. With each new customer, Amara's savings grew. She reinvested carefully, buying better equipment, hiring more helpers, and renting bigger spaces. Before long, her business became a restaurant, brightly painted walls, neatly arranged tables, and the rich smell of jollof rice and groundnut soup drifting into the streets. People traveled from other neighborhoods just to eat her food. On weekends, the line outside stretched down the road. What made Amara's restaurant different wasn't just the taste of her cooking, but the warmth she poured into it. She greeted every customer with respect, treated her workers like family, and made sure no one ever left feeling unseen. One restaurant became 2, then 3. Within a few years, Amara had built a chain of restaurants across Ghana. Each one carried her father's recipes, the very meals she had once prepared in her small kitchen while caring for him. The name of her business spread far beyond her city, and soon she was recognized as one of the most successful women entrepreneurs in the country. Her journey caught the attention of organizers who hosted women's empowerment events. They invited Amara to speak, not just about food but about resilience. Standing on stages in front of hundreds of women, Amara shared her story. How she gave up everything to care for her father, how she was betrayed, how she had started with nothing but her hands and her determination. Her words touched hearts because they were real, spoken not with pride but with honesty. She became a symbol of hope, proof that strength can grow from pain. At one event, a young girl approached her in tears, saying she too had been told she would never succeed, but hearing Amara's story made her believe in herself again. Moments like that reminded Amara that her success was more than just restaurants. It was about inspiring others to rise, no matter how broken they once felt. The community gave her a name that stuck: the queen who rose from ashes. It was whispered with admiration in markets, printed in newspapers, and spoken on radio shows. People saw her not only as a businesswoman, but as a survivor who turned her sorrow into something powerful. Each night, when Amara closed her restaurants and walked home, she carried herself with quiet pride. She had no mansion, no flashy cars, but she had built something stronger: respect, dignity, and a future that no one could take from her. And this time it wasn't given to her. She had created it with her own 2 hands. One evening, years after the will had been read, Amara was in her office overlooking one of her busy restaurants when she heard a knock at the door. When she looked up, she almost didn't recognize the woman standing there. It was Ngozi, the sister who had once laughed at her sacrifices, who had inherited everything and lost it all. Her clothes were no longer designer, her hair no longer perfectly styled. She looked tired, worn down, and smaller than Amara had ever seen her. Ngozi's voice shook as she spoke. "Amara, I have nowhere else to go. I've lost everything. Please help me." The words hung heavy in the room. For a moment Amara was silent, memories rushing back. The will reading, the sting of betrayal, the nights she had cried alone feeling discarded and invisible. Part of her wanted to turn away, to remind Ngozi of the arrogance that had led her here. But as Amara looked at her sister, she didn't feel anger anymore. She felt something deeper: pity, compassion, even love. Life had already punished Ngozi in ways Amara never could. Revenge wasn't necessary. Instead, she saw an opportunity to end the cycle of pain. Calmly, Amara said, "I won't turn you away. If you're willing to work, I'll give you a job in the company. Ngozi's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time her pride fell completely. She nodded, humbled and grateful. Amara leaned back in her chair, her heart steady. She thought of their father, of everything he had left unsaid. And then she whispered to herself almost like a prayer. He gave her his wealth, but life gave me everything he never could: strength, dignity, and respect.